Typically when I start planning to do a review, I grab my notepad and basically just write the script down on this. I've done it for every video that I've made so far. This is a 1984 script. We keep going. It's just page after page of nothing but jotting and ideas and basically just forming the video on paper. But today, we're going to be changing up a bit. I'm going to be going off script, mainly because there is no script. Today, on the Acorn Book Club, the nuttiest book club on the internet, we're going to be exploring Lorenzo Carcaterra's Gangster. If you're like me, you're a sucker for a good mafia story. And why wouldn't you be? It has everything you could ask for. It has romance, action, adventure, comedy, friendship, and betrayal, along with a lot of other things. But on top of all that, it has something that most of us will never get to experience in our own lives, and that is a life of crime and going against the law. Gangsters are always involved in illegal acts called racketeering. They're usually involved in some sort of gambling, prostituting, or scamming of something massive, such as gasoline. Hence why a channel like Michael Francis has been getting so popular despite the fact that he really only started regularly uploading videos 3 or 4 months ago. And by the way, if you are not watching any of Michael Francis' videos or you're not a subscriber of his, you really should be, because if you're watching this video, I assume you like mob-style stuff. Michael Francis is an actual former mobster with a ton of stories from real-life mafia, so I highly recommend you check his channel out if you haven't already. But anyway, back to the book. I know I'm far from the only person out there that loves and adores a well-written mafia story. There's a reason why the Godfather novel was on the New York Times bestseller list for 67 consecutive weeks. There's a reason why the Godfather movie is considered one of the all-time classics, and there's a reason movies and TV shows like The Sopranos, like The Irishman, and like Goodfellas are such well-acclaimed pieces of work. It's because there is a mass market out there for these types of stories. But it's because of everything that I just mentioned that puzzles me as to why Gangster, in particular, hasn't gotten as much praise as all those other works. Clearly, I'm not the only person that believes that Gangster deserves more praise than it has been getting. Take a look at this list. This is the best mafia books according to Goodreads. Number 1 is The Godfather. That goes without saying. I mean, The Godfather is essentially the gold standard for mafia stories. It laid the foundation and the template for fictional mafia stories, both in television, in literature, and pretty much anywhere else. Anywhere you find a mafia story, it has some elements of The Godfather attached to it. It's as similar to Tolkien and the epic fantasy genre. Every story that came after Lord of the Rings has some form of Tolkien-esque influence in it. So Godfather is number 1, not a surprise at all. But look at number 2. Gangster is number 2. According to Goodreads, Gangster is the heir apparent to The Godfather in terms of the quality mafia books. This is not just fictional mafia books either. These are both fiction and non-fiction, because look at number 5 is Wise Guy. Wise Guy is a non-fiction story. It is something that actually happened as told by Henry Hill, who was a real-life wise guy mobster. And Wise Guy was essentially the inspiration to the film Goodfellas. And Goodfellas is fictional, but it's a movie that's fictional, but it's based on a true story, based on real events. Wise Guy, that's where they got it from. It's all real. The Five Families, number 6 right here. Five Families is also a completely non-fiction, real-life account of actual mobsters and the 5 families of New York during the golden age of the Cosa Nostra in America. So, Gangster's number 2. Gangster is above all the other Mario Puzo books. It's ahead of Wise Guy, 5 Families, Casino. This is giving it high praise, but the thing that blows my mind is the amount of ratings it has. Look at all the ratings of these books in the top 7. The Godfather has over 336,000 ratings. The Sicilian has over 20,000. Donnie Brasco has just a shade under 6,700. Wise Guy has almost 13,500. The 5 Families have almost 3,500, and Casino has over 4,500. Gangster only has 2,769. And I say only, that's still a lot. Don't get me wrong on that. That is still a lot. But it is by far the lowest, or the fewest, has the fewest amount of ratings of any book in this top 7, and even though you can't see it here, it has I'm looking at the list right now. It has the least amount of reviews of any book in the top 10. 8 is Underboss. It has over 3,000. 9 is Sempre, which has, or Semper I should say, that has over 26,000. And 10 is Made, which has close to 3,000. So, despite the fact that it is rated number 2, it has a lofty rating. It has the fewest amount of reviews of any book in the top 10 on this Goodreads list. And you might be thinking, well, that's just a fluke and that's just one list. Okay, you could be right. Let's take a look at another list. This is Ranker.com's list of best Mafia books. Again, both fiction and non-fiction. Gangster's number 5. It's not as high as the Goodreads list, but it's still in the top 5. And there's a lot of Mafia books out there. The ones above it, I couldn't screenshot the entire thing because it's pretty big, so I just screenshotted the Gangster part. But the 4 books ahead of it, number 1's The Godfather. Again, no surprise. 2 is Casino by Nicholas Pileggi. 3 is Wise Guy. And 4 is The Sicilian, which is also by Mario Puzo, which is the sequel, essentially, to The Godfather. So Gangster is in the top 5 of 2 lists. 2 lists of the best Mafia books, both fiction and non-fiction. That is lofty praise. And yet still, not a lot of people talk about it. One final thing I wanted to show you guys before I actually start reviewing the book itself instead of just praising it without any substance. This is the Gangster novel Wikipedia page. This is not a new book at all. This book is, you can see the publication date, 2001. This is almost a 20-year-old book at the time of this recording. The Wikipedia page is basically 1 paragraph, a plot summary. That's it. Nothing more. But anyway, let's start reviewing the actual book, shall we? The story begins with a man named Gabe sitting at the hospital bedside of his father figure, Angelo Vestieri. Now at this point in time in the book, it is the summer of 1996. Angelo is in his 80s, creeping up on his 90s. He's lived a long, fulfilling life, mainly spent as the underboss of a New York crime family that has ruled the city with an iron fist for the last few decades. The fact that Angelo has actually gotten to this point in his life where he is on a deathbed, hooked up to a bunch of wires and tubes in a hospital, it's actually kind of miraculous considering the life he's led for pretty much his entire life ever since he was a child. Most gangsters in this profession usually end up 6 feet under with a bullet between their eyes. And trust me when I say this, these are not spoilers that I'm telling you guys. All this can be found within the first 5 to 10 pages of the book. It is made perfectly clear early on that Angelo was probably the greatest gangster in the United States during this tenure. So, what's the hook then? There are 2 things that really latch you on to this book that make you want to read more within the first chapter. The first one being the aura of mystery that surrounds Angelo. Yes, he's considered one of the greatest, if not the greatest gangster to ever live during this period of time. But why is that? What did he do that made him so special and unique to everyone else? And as I mentioned earlier, he's one of the only gangsters that actually got to live out and die on his deathbed. Why did he not get a bullet between his eyes like almost everyone else in this profession? And the second thing is, there is a woman that comes to visit Angelo and meets with Gabe and speaks with him. And her name is Mary, and she says that she was one of the lovers and probably the last love of Angelo's life. And then she proceeds to tell Gabe everything about Angelo's life from the beginning before he was even born to this period of time where they sit now. And from there, we go 90 years back into the past, into the summer of 1906 in Naples, where we meet Paulino Vestieri, the father of Angelo. By this point in time in 1906, Angelo has not even been born yet. He's not even been conceived. He's still just a tiny little sperm swimming around in his dad's testicles. But we learn that before he even enters his mother's womb, his pathway to life is trod with blood and despair. The tragedy in all this is that pathway to blood and despair that I just mentioned, it was mainly started by Angelo's father, Paulino. It was totally out of Angelo's control in this point in time because he didn't even exist yet. But that's not to suggest that Angelo's father was a gangster himself. No, no, no. Far from it. The complete opposite, in fact. Paulino hated the mob. He desperately wanted to get on a ship and go to America because he hated the mob so much he just wanted to get as far away from them as possible. But certain circumstances happened involving Angelo's older brother and Paulino's first son, Carlo. Now, obviously, I won't tell you what happens with Paulino and his son Carlo, because that would be dipping into obvious spoiler territory. I will just say that what happens and how far this man Paulino Vesteri is willing to go to avoid the gangster life in both his native Italy and when he immigrates with his wife to America. It's honestly shocking. The shock value in this is bigger than I think anything in The Godfather was, which is saying something, because The Godfather by Mario Puzo was just simply beautifully written with many twists and turns that you would think it was a King's Island ride. But instead, in this, you get straight off the bat, within the first chapter, a shocking revelation as to what happens with the Vesteri family before they leave Naples to go and immigrate to Ellis Island. After having emigrated to New York City, the Vesteri family have a second son, whom they deem Angelo. This is where the Angelo Vesteri story is put into motion. A quick rundown of what happens with Angelo's life towards the beginning is his relationship with Pudge Nichols, who at first was a schoolyard bully that becomes his best friend, the relationship he has with Ida the Goose, who is one very highly respected female gangsters over time, and as well as his complicated and really distraught relationship with his father Paulino. Again, I can't stress enough how much Paulino Vesteri resented the Mafia. He hated everything about the gangster life. But his son, Angelo, they're not two peas in the same pod. Just because they're father and son, they have different mindsets. That's what makes their relationship so convoluted and so tragic. That gangster lifestyle that Paulino had vehemently hated more than anything else in his life, that he was willing to go so far as to abandon their homeland of Italy to immigrate to a foreign continent just to protect his family from the Mafia, only for his second son to embrace that gangster lifestyle. It creates a rift between Paulino and Angelo that they never really recover from. This is how most of the Mafia stories where the main narrative is set somewhere between the Prohibition era and the year subsequent to the end of World War II go. A family immigrates from Sicily or Italy to the United States to New York City and Ellis Island. The father preaches hard work and labor. They usually work hard hours with not a lot of pay, somewhere probably along the dock or the pier or something like that. But the son sees his father's struggles, where he works endless hours a week only to barely make ends meet. He sees that and says, I don't want to live that life. He sees the life of crime, where not only is he making more money, but he's also basically getting to do whatever he wants and not have to obey by the law. And that just becomes more appealing to him. It happens with The Godfather, happened with Mafia 2 with Vito Scaletta, happens here with Gangster. It's a simple yet effective formula for telling a well-written mob story this far back into the past. Now, I can't really go into too much more detail about Angelo's life without creeping into spoiler territory. All I'll say is that for most of the first part of the story, you read about Angelo's progression in life, how he evolves, what he does to become a gangster, and how he becomes such a great gangster. But, again, I can't really give you the details about that. You're just going to have to read it yourself, and you should, because it's a great book. As for the structure of the book, it is one of the only books I've ever read that switches from first person to third person and does it rather well. The only other book I can say that I've read that does a first person to third person transition and does it rather flawlessly is The Martian. For those of you that don't know, in the literary world, it is highly advised to just stick with one perspective, to either go with first person or third person point of view and to not go back and forth. Gangster and The Martian are the only two books I've read that do go back and forth between the first person and the third person perspectives and do it well. The reason Gangster pulls this off so well is because when it goes to its first person perspective, it doesn't flip-flop back and forth between characters narrating their points of view. It sticks with one person, and that's Gabe. And Gabe is essentially Angelo's adopted son and the heir apparent to Angelo's underworld crime organization once he either retires or just flat out kicks the bucket. Basically, most of the first half of the story is told from third-person perspective because it involves Angelo's upbringing and his rise to power as a gangster, but it's not being narrated by someone who was there to experience it with Angelo. The first-person perspective is Gabe telling his own experiences along with Angelo, but he doesn't meet Angelo until Angelo is in his 60s. So that's basically the second half of the book, is Gabe telling Mary, while they're both at Angelo's bedside during the hospital, basically him telling Mary his own experience with Angelo. Trust me, I could keep talking about this book for hours, but I won't, mainly because it's too time consuming and because I would be spoiling a lot of the narrative for you guys, which I don't want to do because I want you guys to read it for yourselves. But I will give you guys a quick rundown of some of the other events that happen throughout the book. You get to learn about Angelo and his relationship and friendship with Pudge Nichols, how both of them got involved in organized crime, and their rise in the ranks from criminal underlings to managing their own crews to essentially becoming the biggest and most unstoppable crime family in the entire city of New York. You also get to learn about Angelo and Pudge's personal lives, both the good and the very tragically bad, as well as what Gabe means to them when he eventually comes into their lives later on in the second half of the story. This version of Gangster that I own is a 456-page paperback edition, and some of you might be thinking that a 456-page book sounds intimidating to you. I promise you, if you start reading Gangster, you will breeze past it. All in all, I consider Gangster an A+ read. I highly recommend anyone that likes to read to give this book a shot because it is that good. The cliffhangers at the end of the chapters are so well orchestrated that you want just to continue reading through them until you look at the clock and realize that it's 3 in the morning and you probably should get some sleep. But sometimes, even when your body is pleading with you to get some shut-eye, it cannot overcome your desire to read this exceptional, masterfully crafted book. Honestly, the fact that this book never made it onto a bestseller list is beyond my comprehension. And the fact that it has not been turned into a film or a TV series or a video game is also beyond me. Come on, Hollywood, you make 900 frickin' Marvel movies every year, and you keep recreating old classic films and butchering the crap out of them because either A, you don't have the creativity to think of something new and original for yourselves, or B, you're just too lazy to get off your cash cow when you've had a potential gold mine sitting at your front door for the last 20 years. You gotta stop. Gotta stop. Rant over. And why am I even getting mad at Hollywood? I know the book would always be better anyway, no matter what they came up with. So anyway, read the book, do it justice because not many people have read it, and they should. Get it on the bestseller list before it's too late. Anyway, thank you guys for watching.